Today is January 28th, and it is the birthday of one of the United States' 6 military branches. On January 28th, 1915, an act of Congress merged the United States Revenue Cutter Service and the United States Life-Saving Service to create the United States Coast Guard. But despite that act, the position of the Coast Guard as an independent branch of the military was certainly not secure. Even despite brilliant service during the First World War, there was a very real chance that the Coast Guard was simply going to be absorbed into the United States Navy until the passage of the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution. It was Prohibition that would establish the reputation of the hooligan Navy and create the template for the modern service that we know today. It is history that deserves to be remembered. The United States Navy was officially disbanded at the end of the American Revolutionary War in 1785, and the remaining ships of the Navy were sold off. While the young nation did not see the need for and did not have the cash for a standing Navy, it soon realized that the best way to raise revenue was through tariffs on imports. But tariffs simply led to smuggling, and so in 1790 the United States Revenue Marine was created to serve as armed customs enforcement. As the Revenue Marine was the direct predecessor to the Coast Guard and was created before the establishment of the Permanent Navy in 1794, the Coast Guard is considered to be the nation's oldest continually operating seagoing service. Officially renamed the United States Revenue Cutter Service in 1863, despite being created for customs enforcement, the cutters of the service often played military roles and served bravely in every conflict in which the nation was involved, from the 1798 Quasi-War with France through the Spanish-American War. Another of their responsibilities was, of course, fighting pirates, because don't all good stories involve pirates? The United States Life-Saving Service, intended to protect the lives of shipwrecked mariners and passengers, was first established with the Newell Act in 1848, providing for the establishment of several life-saving stations that would have equipment for marine rescue. The stations were first manned by volunteers, but later professional crews were funded under the Department of the Treasury. The consolidation of the two services into the Coast Guard was managed largely via the efforts of Massachusetts Representative Thomas Chandler Thatcher. Seen as a way to preserve the life-saving service, which was deteriorating due to lack of funds, while a significant reason provided for the merger was a great increase in efficiency of the service, and newspapers touted the creation of a military service formed for helpful instead of destructive purposes, there was another underlying goal. In a time when Congress was reticent to spend on national defense, the Coast Guard would provide a ready reserve of trained officers and men should the Navy have to expand in time of war. The March 7, 1915 edition of the Washington, D.C. Evening Star quoted Ellis P. Bertholf, Captain Commandant of the new service. The combination of these two services gives a naval reserve of 4,100, of whom 250 are highly trained officers. In a time of war, drilled, trained, and instructed in military duties, the entire force would be of great value to the country. The legislation creating the United States Coast Guard discarded the Guard as a branch of the land and naval forces of the United States at all times. But instead of being under the Department of the Navy or the then Department of War, the Guard was designated a service in the Treasury Department, with the important caveat, except when operating as a service in the Navy. The President of the United States was given the authority to move the Coast Guard under the Department of the Navy in times of emergency. And thus this humanitarian force could quite quickly be transformed for destructive purposes. And that would happen quickly. Before the service was even 3 years old, when war was formally declared on April 6, 1917, the Coast Guard was transferred to the operational control of the Navy. The men of the Coast Guard served bravely during the war, including the loss of 111 men of the Coast Guard with the sinking of the cutter USS Tampa in September 1918. Some 9,000 Coast Guardsmen served in the Great War. But despite that service, Congress was simply unsure that a separate branch was necessary. In 1920, hearings were held before the House Committee on Interstate and Foreign Commerce about merging the Coast Guard into the Navy. Critics argued that the Coast Guard simply didn't have enough ships to protect the growing U.S. merchant fleet. The Wall Street Journal reported in May 1920, "There is not sufficient time to build new ships, and transfer of ships from the Navy to the Coast Guard seems out of the question for political and other reasons. Therefore, the only practical solution appears to be to make the Coast Guard a branch of the Navy." In fact, Coast Guard Chief Historian Scott Price told the World War I Centennial Commission that even many Coast Guard officers wanted to stay with the Navy, which offered more promotional opportunities. And thus the Coast Guard might have disappeared, were not for the unexpected results of the 18th Amendment to the United States Constitution. Proponents of Prohibition had argued that banning the sale and distribution of alcohol would create numerous economic and social benefits, and that the nation would be so pleased with the law that little money would be required to enforce it. That was one of many promises about Prohibition that would not come to pass. Attempts to evade the law started immediately. Smithsonian Magazine notes that on the first day of Prohibition, January 17, 1920, in Detroit, federal officers shut down 2 illegal stills, an act that would become common in the years ahead, and reported that their operators had offered bribes, which would become even more common. On the Maine-Canada border, reported a New Brunswick paper, Canadian liquor in quantities from 1 gallon to a truckload are being hidden in the northern woods and distributed by automobile, sled, and iceboat, on snowshoes and skis. And those tasked with enforcing the law were quickly overwhelmed. E-History, the website of the Ohio State University's Department of History, explains patrolling thousands of miles of borders to stop smuggling was nearly impossible, as was locating and shutting down the numerous stills and speakeasies popping up around the country. The 1919 National Prohibition Act left enforcement largely up to the Internal Revenue Service. The website Prohibition and Interactive History notes that the government provided funds for only 1,500 agents at first to enforce prohibition across the country. They were issued guns and given access to vehicles, but many had little or no training. Effective enforcement of the Volstead Act was almost doomed from the start. The country's 48 states at the time were not inclined to help much, preferring to have federal agents shoulder the burden. Available operating funds were inadequate. The federal government and states together spent less than $500,000 to enforce Prohibition in 1923. The 1964 Coast Guard publication Rum War at Sea by Coast Guard Commander Malcolm Willoughby explained, "Like Old Man River, the flood of liquor kept rolling along." At first, Prohibition had little to do with the Coast Guard. Willoughby notes that at the end of the 1921 fiscal year, the annual report of the U.S. Treasury Department pointed out that enforcement of the Prohibition law increased the regular customs activities, and that seizures of contraband liquor by customs officers continued in increasing quantities. But, Willoughby notes, Coast Guard activity related to liquor smuggling was not even mentioned. In that first year and a half, such activity was largely incidental and assumed no important proportions. But that would quickly change. As smuggling liquor offered the possibility of enormous profits, more and more contraband liquor was being smuggled into the nation by sea, something popularly called rum running. An April 2021 article on the website Defense Media Network explains what that meant to the Coast Guard. Customs and Prohibition agents were overwhelmed by the rum fleet. In their fight against maritime smuggling, they focused on seizing contraband as it landed at wharves and in some cases on intercepting small craft inshore. It was a losing battle, and the Treasury Department turned to the agency responsible for protecting revenues and preventing smuggling at sea, the Coast Guard. The early smuggling tactics, Defense Media Network writes, were largely developed by one man. A pioneer bootlegger in those early days was the yacht builder Bill McCoy, who helped establish the practice of taking cargo onto schooners at ports in either Nassau, Bahamas, or Saint-Pierre-et-Miquelon, the French islands off the coast of Newfoundland, and then anchoring in international waters to operate a floating liquor store that sold to smaller, faster launches known as contact boats. The website Today in Monmouth History describes McCoy's success. Bill McCoy was known to pay his debts, did not dilute his spirits as others did. His rum was known as the gold standard, and he set the price by getting top dollar, so much so that his rates were published as the given for Rum Row. As a result, McCoy was one of the most brazen and successful bootleggers of the Prohibition era. Willoughby goes on. Things were beginning to take shape. In spring of 1921, McCoy ran 1,500 cases of liquor into Savannah in his schooner Henry L. Marshall. In late May 1921, McCoy stood off the coast of Long Island in the schooner Tamaka, anchored and contacted bootleggers. Word of his arrival spread rapidly, and so did his cargo of 1,500 cases of whiskey. It was all sold within a few days to anyone who had the price, and then he departed. Bill McCoy had set a pattern. The Office of the Coast Guard Historian writes, by 1922, the Federal Prohibition Commission counted hundreds of motherships hovering off the U.S. shores in Rum Row, with up to 60 off New Jersey coast alone. These motherships were also stationed off of Boston, New York, the Chesapeake Bay, New Orleans, and West Coast ports. Enforcement was difficult for many reasons. Willoughby notes that in those days, legal territorial waters within 3-mile limit. U.S. jurisdiction ended at that point and international waters began. While American vessels were still subject to seizure, foreign vessels were not, unless the Coast Guard wanted to risk creating an international incident. Thus, Willoughby writes, American rum runners merely changed their vessels to foreign registry, many under nominee ownership. In July 1921, the Coast Guard cutter Seneca boarded the Henry L. Marshall off the coast of Atlantic City outside the 3-mile limit, while Bill McCoy escaped in a motorboat. The schooner was seized, and U.S. Marshals found evidence of a gigantic rum-running plot involving many persons along the Atlantic coast. Willoughby notes that seizure outside the 3-mile limit was justified by federal authorities by what they termed was evidence of a conspiracy to violate the customs laws and the Volstead Act. The seizure of the Henry L. Marshall was, Willoughby notes, the first seizure by the Coast Guard of a large rum runner in what might be termed American waters, and the first to be involved in international controversy. 4 days after the boat was seized, the British government protested that the seizure was outside the 3-mile limit fixed by international law for many years. The case took years to proceed through the courts before finally being upheld in 1923 when the U.S. Supreme Court declined to review a ruling by the Circuit Court of Appeals. As a result of the seizure, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Bill McCoy. He was apprehended in November 1923 when the Tamaka was boarded. The boat was outside the 3-mile limit, but according to the New York Times, the seizure was ordered by the Treasury Department after it was established that the Tamaka had been in contact with the shore. McCoy was captured after a brief battle where a machine gun was fired from the Tamaka against the cutter Seneca, but the boat quickly surrendered when the Seneca returned fire with her 6-inch guns. After surrendering, McCoy said, "I have no tale of woe to tell you. I was outside the 3-mile limit, selling whiskey and good whiskey to anyone and everyone who wanted to buy." McCoy pleaded guilty, received a light sentence of just 9 months. Today, in Monmouth History Explains, a celebrity of his day, he was even permitted to leave the jailhouse daily, as long as he returned by 9 p.m. He once even attended a prize fight in ringside seats at Ebbets Field in Brooklyn, with the warden of his prison. After he was released, he left the rum-rumming business, finding it by then to be too crowded. The challenges would only grow. The Office of the Coast Guard Historian writes, by 1923, Coast Guard Commandant William Reynolds admitted his cutters could prevent only a small part of the onrush of illegal booze, which was entirely unprecedented in the history of the country. An issue of the Coast Guard publication, the Commandant's Bulletin, explains that there is general agreement that the early years of the Coast Guard's interdiction and law enforcement efforts were marked by only scattered successes. Some say that no more than 5% of the U.S.-bound liquor was stopped in these years. It was time for the Coast Guard to expand. The Office of the Coast Guard Historian writes, by October 1923, Reynolds submitted a plan to Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon to deal with the situation. Reynolds called for 20 new high-seas cutters, 200 coastal patrol cutters, and 90 fast picket boats. He asked for $20 million in supplemental funding for his vast fleet and 3,500 additional personnel to crew it. At the time, it was an incredible request for funds. Defense Media Network notes how that affected personnel. What followed over the next few years was an unprecedented expansion of the Coast Guard. The service grew from 4,000 to 10,000 personnel. A fleet of new cutters, specifically designed to intercept and catch rum runners, was rolled out over the next few years, to be aided in their efforts by 25 refurbished Navy destroyers that had been mothballed after the war. Among the new classes of vessels were new 75-foot wooden patrol boats called 6 bitters. 25 cents was 2 bits, thus 75-foot boats were 6 bits. Operating on twin Stirling 200-horsepower 6-cylinder gasoline engines, the boats, with a crew of 8 and a rapid-fire 1-pounder gun, could make 15 knots. The Coast Guard historian notes, with over 200 cutters, the wooden 75-foot 6-bitter class was the largest cutter class in Coast Guard history. A larger 78-foot version could make 22 knots. 33 125-foot buck and a quarters and 18 165-foot B-class cutters were designed to track the larger motherships. The Coast Guard also established an air wing using custom-built Loening OL-5 amphibian float planes with a top speed of 150 miles per hour and a range of 450 miles. The service's first aviation interdiction took place on June 24th, 1925. The Office of the Coast Guard Historian notes, a year later, in recognition of aviation's importance, Congress funded the purchase of 5 new Coast Guard aircraft, the first of thousands of service air assets. As time went on, the game became one of cat and mouse. Defense Media Network notes, within the strategic sphere, tactics and countermeasures became increasingly intricate. Rum runners used decoy ships, false SOS signals, and hidden compartments to avoid the Coasties. The smugglers used sophisticated codes, requiring the development of Coast Guard intelligence service and code-breaking operation. The Coast Guard captains responded with innovative tactics, using confiscated rum runner vessels to approach unsuspecting rum runners and dubious legal tactics to confiscate the small vessels that supplied the mother ships, starving them out and forcing them to come to port. The game was not without risks. In 1927, a rum runner named Horace Alderman managed to conceal a gun with him when he was taken aboard the 6-bitter CG-2409. He killed 3 men, 2 guardsmen, and a Secret Service agent. Convicted on 3 counts of murder and piracy on the high seas, he was executed by hanging at a Coast Guard base in Fort Lauderdale. Defense Media Network notes, Alderman was the only person ever executed on Coast Guard property, and the only person ever executed by the federal government for a prohibition-related crime. 2. The Coast Guard received criticism themselves over incidents where Coast Guard interdictions resulted in deaths of suspected smugglers. The actions helped to reinforce the growing belief that prohibition was unenforceable, resulting in its repeal in 1933. Still, Willoughby makes a case for the success of Coast Guard operations during Prohibition. Considering the numerical strength of the adversaries, the immunity of the foreign rum runner beyond the legal limit, and the great expanse of ocean in which operations were carried out, one can only conclude that the Coast Guard did a highly credible piece of work in making its thousands of seizures. The amount of liquor successfully landed was greatly reduced. The life of the rum runner was made uncomfortable and hazardous, and in the later years, the business became almost unprofitable. The noble experiment, as Prohibition was called, had many unintended consequences, including the rise of criminal organizations. But among those consequences was its impact on the United States Coast Guard. It was during the period of Prohibition that the Coast Guard doubled in size and established a significant fleet of vessels of varying capabilities. During Prohibition, the Coast Guard established a permanent aviation branch, a permanent intelligence division. It gained interagency experience by doing things like standardizing communication procedures with the Navy and having the first U.S. Navy ships that were crewed by Coast Guard crews. It was during Prohibition that the Coast Guard established its reputation as an internationally recognized law enforcement organization, a reputation that it still enjoys today. In short, it was Prohibition that cemented the position of the United States Coast Guard as a permanent branch of the United States military and helped to prepare the Coast Guard and Coast Guardsmen for the significant and challenging roles that they would play during the Second World War. Come join our community of fans who believe that history deserves to be remembered at thehistoryguyguild.locals.com. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The History Guy, short snippets of forgotten history. And if you did enjoy, feed the algorithm by making a comment or clicking that like button. If you have suggestions for future episodes, please send those to our suggestions email box. Check out our webpage at thehistoryguy.net. And of course, we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo and check out our merchandise at teespring.com. And if you'd like more episodes of Forgotten History, all you need to do is subscribe.